Hello, everybody from Club Terrace. I've heard a lot about your community. Sounds like a very interesting place you live. And I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to visit when I was down there a few times earlier in the year. I've been asked to make a few comments about the whole experience of bushfire impact and recovery, based on my experiences from many different communities over the years. I understand that every community's experience of fire is different in some ways, very specific about the circumstances of how things happened in your particular area and who was there and who wasn't. But I think there are also some fundamental characteristics that are the same, not only in all fires, but all traumatic events. I wanted to just say a few words about the process of impact as I've come to understand it. And the first is that, by definition, a trauma is a threatening experience that is way outside normal expectations. Of course, I understand that numbers of you have been involved with the CFA and fought fires before, and you may well have had fires in your community. So there will be experience to fall back on, and the more we have, the better prepared we are, the more we're protected from trauma, because ultimately, I think what makes a dangerous experience traumatic is that what happens shatters assumptions that we didn't realise we had about what to expect of ourselves, other people, nature, the community, or whatever. And I think what's important about the shattering of assumptions is we can't go without assumptions. We can't live life constantly looking over our shoulder wondering what's going to happen next. We need to actually develop expectations and assumptions about how things are. And we develop them by living in a routine way and having predictable things happening. And when we've been through a natural disaster and all that's been upturned, there's nothing to replace the slow re-establishment of assumptions on the basis of experience of normality. And so that the recovery process is very much a matter of rebuilding a sense of normality. But of course, you can't even begin to do that when there are piles of debris and the whole bush has been burnt and the lifestyle's been disrupted and people can't live where they normally do and moved out and so on. So the early part of the recovery process is not so much starting a forward recovery as trying to sort of stabilise what has happened and settle it all down. But I think there are a couple of important things to think about, that the sooner we can establish a kind of forward-looking set of routines about the new life, the more we start to build that sense of security again. In this early stage, which I would take for many people, many communities, is maybe the first 6 months, maybe even the first year before things really start to settle into a routine. People experience how enormously emotionally exhausting and physically exhausting it is to live without your normal routines, the normal expectations. And part of that's because we really have to think about everything we do, because we can't do it all the automatic ways. Nothing works right. Systems surrounding your community are disrupted and not working right. And so during this period, there's a constant improvisation and adaptation to what's going on. And I'm sure you've had that feeling, I'm just sick of it, I just want it to stop, I want to go back to normal. Those who've lost their houses, I just want to go home. These sort of feelings show how this deep layer of assumptions comes welling up. We want to just rest in this. As we feel, when we rest in those assumptions, we re-establish our sense of normality, and we start to rebuild our energy. And when you can't rest and you can't feel at home, you never really rebuild it. So one of the really serious problems that starts to show up after a few months and gets stronger as time goes on is the sense of a deep bone aching exhaustion. It's not just a physical exhaustion often, but many people will say, I feel somehow emotionally exhausted. I can't cope with people. I can't deal with change. I don't want to deal with problems, and so on. Now, I'm not sure how that is with you, but I would expect that wherever you see people looking very tired after a disaster, and I've seen quite a few of them online recently, it's accompanied by this feeling. It's really struggling. It all feels a bit too much at times. Now, I think I want to talk in a minute about how do we take care of that exhaustion going forward, but I want to say a couple of things about some of the very common repercussions of the traumatic event. The first is that because a traumatic experience shatters the assumptions, we often find it very hard to put it in the past. The way that shows up is that in order to deal with it, we go into this, we call it the state of high arousal. We get into this narrowed focus, the adrenaline mode of dealing with what we have to deal with right now, here, then this bit, then this bit. So we end up with a whole collection of what the psychologists call flashbulb memories, just that sudden flash, the flames, the shouting, the wind, whatever else. And these flashbulb memories always are triggered by the moments of great danger or the moments of doubt, moments of threat. And I want to just explain something that I've learned time and again, is that those memories will be stored in, let's call it the high arousal loop in our brain, so that whenever anything comes up to remind us of that, it acts like a trigger and reawakens those memories, the wind blowing, the sounds, the smell of smoke, the weather, people shouting, sirens, could be anything. They're completely dependent on what you experienced. And these we call triggers, and I'm sure you use that term yourself, that actually threaten to bring these memories up. I think it's really important to understand that that's central to the trauma experience, to kind of expect it and to work with it. And I think we work with it by trying to just think what's been brought up. And what I think people usually find is what's brought up is the most dangerous moment, the most emotional moment, the most unhappy, stressing, fearful moment. Usually the moment when I don't know what's going to happen. And then that converts into emotion and we get upset in some way, angry maybe, or frightened or whatever. And in that moment, we're back in the original experience and we've reawakened it, we've relived it, if you like. What gets us out of that is to actually stop and say, now, wait a second, what happened next? And what happened next? And how did I get out? And what help came? And how did I put my plan into action? Whatever. Keep telling the story to yourself through until you get to the point where it's actually going to be safe. I'm going to be all right. And this is what we do when we work with people with post-traumatic stress, because usually you find as they start talking, they interrupt the story at those points of highest threat and they'll go off on something else, not what happened next, because that's actually not threatening, but how angry they are that the fire brigade let them down, or they should have been burning in the forest, or I made these terrible mistakes, or somebody did the wrong thing. You know, these are more emotional things, which are a very important part of the story, but they actually take us away from the narrative, the story, the sequence, because the sequence is what will take us out of the danger into the present. the survival story. And the sense of time and the past comes from putting the story together. Now, we find that that's one of the great values of communities meeting together and talking, telling their stories, sharing it with each other, talking about it in their families, not going into the emotion, but just remembering what happened and how they got themselves through in spite of whatever mistakes they might have made. And so one of the things I would encourage is that if you find you've got those trigger flashbulb memories, or if it's just even emotions, or maybe even you don't want to go there because you can feel they're under the surface, you don't want them to come through, that keeping the lid on that is very, very costly in terms of energy. It's very tiring in the long term. And I think to have situations where maybe people you feel comfortable with, or maybe occasions when it comes up, you reminisce together, and don't just reminisce the dangerous part, reminisce right through to where you got to the point where you knew it was safe. And this making of a story is very helpful. In this experience, there's one very important experience I want to mention. Now, I call this the death encounter. Now, it doesn't happen to everybody, but the death encounter is when people shift from the point where they think this is very dangerous, I could be in danger, to the point where they think, oh my God, this is it, I'm going to die. And it's not uncommon in bushfires that people in particular moments think, I'm not going to get out of this. We may not make this through. Any words like that. It's really like, hang on a second, this is a turning point in my life. Now, when we have that experience, usually we have it, it's such a deep part of our instinctive nature that there are no words for it. And that when you ask people to explain what happened, they say, I don't know, it's a blank. But something happens. And I think what's important, I may be putting it a little bit too extremely, but when I've had people particularly who, I don't know, were in a criminal event and had a gun pointed at them and they thought, that's it, I'm definitely going to die now. And then you ask them, what did you do to get ready? Even if you've got a fraction of a second, people usually do something. I remember a woman who once said to me, I had the gun pointed at me, and it took her quite a while to sort of go into that blankness, and she eventually realised what she did was she said goodbye to her husband, whom she'd been married to for 30 years, you know, in her mind, goodbye, Harry. Now, one of her symptoms after the trauma was she felt not only disconnected from everybody around her, her work colleagues, her friends, whatever, but she also felt incredibly detached from her husband. And this caused quite a bit of conflict because he didn't understand what had happened, because as far as he was concerned, no one was hurt, because it was all resolved by the police. No one was hurt. And, and months later, he was really getting very angry and upset because she was so disengaged. And she didn't understand her feelings herself. She said, I feel like somebody from another planet. I just can't share the interests and the engagements that all of my friends and colleagues have. And it's reassuring to have my husband because I'm used to him, but I don't really feel warm or emotionally involved with him. And when we finally recaptured that moment and she realised she said goodbye, I explained how this helped her to understand all of the changes that had gone by, because she hadn't just said goodbye with her mind, she said it with her deepest emotional being. And when you say goodbye, you let go. And she'd let go. And I explained this, and suddenly her eyes lit up and she said, oh, I get it. I've said goodbye, but I haven't said hello. So what she really needed to do is, when she came out of the situation, was greeted by her husband, if she understood it, she'd say, oh, I'm not dead, I'm here, we've got our life together, let's go and celebrate. Let's go and celebrate our survival. But people often don't do that, and they particularly don't do it after a bushfire, because there's so much else happening and so many other problems for such a long time they can go through months. I think when I had this conversation with this woman was about 6 months later, and she'd been living with this all the time. So you can see it had made a lot of changes. Now, I've certainly talked to people. I talked to when I was over in Kangaroo Island after their fires in January. Red Cross had me over there. I talked to about 3 or 4 people who had this experience, I'm going to die. And, just there standing around eating sausages at a barbecue, we're able to actually pick that moment up and say, what did you do? And then what happened? And why didn't you die? And how did you look after yourself? I remember one woman who did a lot of things that whenever she looked back, she thought were really stupid things. But in fact, she was not well practiced and not well trained. So whatever she did was not exactly the best thing, but she quickly realized it's not the best thing and then changed it and changed it again and made a series of steps and learned quickly from her experience and managed to get her and her children out. And so congratulations, what more can we ask for? In her next fire, she'll be better. And the one after that, she'll be better. No, she won't. She will have left the day before. But, that's how it is with disasters. So I think it was part of this reminiscing, really just if you or anyone you're talking to expresses that in whatever way, that thought of this is it, and this is over, I'm not going to make it. What did you do to get ready? And undo it because it's not correct. And it'll organise you in a way that doesn't fit. And congratulate yourself on what you did to survive. None of us are experts in this stuff. And give yourself time, and you might have to work it over a number of times to do this. It's amazing how much work people do in their supportive conversations, and I hope these ideas will help to, inform people's conversations so that they can be a little bit more productive. Another thing, just a couple of other points, is what we notice so often is that in the immediate aftermath, when people come out of this state of being totally focused around the fire issues and survival issues, there's often a period of everyone coming together and working together around immediate survival issues. And this catches everyone in the community. So I think we need to get away from simple ideas like you're affected if you had stuff burned, you're affected if you were really traumatized. No, everybody's affected, just in different ways. And in fact, I think often the way we're affected has to do with who we are and our past experience and all that sort of thing. And I guarantee there are some people who didn't have anything burnt, maybe their fences and their yards or whatever, who are likely to have had a private bad experience that will take a long time to get over, whereas other people who lost everything, but who somehow or another have got the ability to accept it and sort of rebuild and move on. And so they will be more likely to be, so to speak, over it, maybe a year or two, whereas the other person feels, I just can't really settle. And so I think one of the things in this early sense of togetherness is often a simplistic notion that it's all about those who suffered the material loss. That's a very important factor. But there are so many indirect ways in which disasters affect people. And so what I notice time and again is as time goes by, the circumstances get more and more complicated. And this creates tensions in communities that I think it's important to guard against. Tensions between those that were burned out and those that weren't, those who are insured and those who are not, those who are eligible for this payment and those who aren't, and all sorts of, and it's very easy for people to form opinions about whether people are entitled to be upset or not. Actually, I can say from my experience, everyone who's upset is entitled to be upset, but it often takes quite a while with some people to dig back and find out where it's really coming from. And so I think the natural tendency is that everyone's circumstance becomes so different that tensions emerge in communities. I call them cleavage planes. Diamonds are very hard, but if you hit them at a certain angle, it splits. That's a cleavage plane, and you can cut diamonds up. Well, communities can be very strong in some ways, but in another dimension, with the right pressure, they just split. It's such a common thing that I just want to mention it. What holds it together is coming back to our common ground, what we share of our history, our love for the place where we live. And so I think to be on guard for those, and that's where being able to meet and talk together and make decisions together as a community, it provides a focus to put all those things together. The final thing I want to talk about is this growing sense of exhaustion. When you're in this state, as I mentioned, of constant pressure outside your assumptions, constantly adapting, nothing's routine, nothing works easily, multiple demands, things that are frustrating all the time. This is the chronic stress scenario. The fire and the issues around the fire is the acute stress. Acute stress is, I've got a massive problem, I've added something right now and it's going to get worse. The chronic stress is, I've got a huge problem. There's nothing I can do about it right now. I've just got to keep plodding. And when we get into that state, it's a different bodily state. Adrenaline, we use up all our reserves and then we collapse. But in this chronic stress, we can't do that. So the body's got a way of shifting and not using the reserves, but plugging into our bodies and drawing the energy out of our own tissues, even in our mind. And it does that by shutting down everything that's not absolutely essential and just taking the energy from there and sidetracking it into what we have to do. So people's lives become a bit narrower and more focused. They give up doing their recreation and their exercise and their diet and their social life because they just don't have the energy for it. So their life gradually is remodeled to become work. And when we try and say, why don't you take some more time off? They say, don't be stupid, I haven't got time. Look at all the work that needs to be done. The only problem is that we don't last if we keep doing that. And that's when we've got to actually become cleverer, because so often people get into trouble. Many, particularly rural people who are resilient and used to working hard and being self-reliant, they'll often go the first year and then even the second year. But we noticed in Black Saturday there were a whole group of people came in this towards the end of the third year, and then another group towards the end of the fourth year who were saying, we've actually fallen apart, we really need some help. We thought, they'll say, I thought I could do this myself. I've always dealt with things myself, but I really can't go on anymore. So they've come when they've burned out at the end of their tether. And I think there are things about a big disaster that probably no one's really experienced before. So they don't see it coming so often. And we were talking to a group the other day. In fact, one of the education department consultants was talking about her Black Saturday experience, talking about herself in this state and how in the third year she had quite a crisis, but she couldn't recognise the signs earlier on. She'd never quite been there before. So that's why I think an important message I like to give around about the 6-month mark is you'd be absolutely superhuman if you were going to go through this without having difficulties. In fact, on my shelf, I've got the memoirs, the life story of the CFA captain's wife in Macedon. It's a wonderful story about recovery. She was heroic and supported her community. And she says all of us that were involved, she didn't lose anything, but she supported her community. She said all of us that were in that group who worked with the community had our breakdown at some point. And she describes vividly her point, where she just had to take a whole lot of time out. I think we can do a lot to prevent that. And the way we do it is by recognise this chronic stress state. And when we're in that state is we find we've got short fuses, we've got short concentration span, We can only focus on the thing that we've decided to deal with. And if somebody comes in from left field offering us something else, we feel overloaded and we get irritated. We get fixated on things. We find it very hard to actually make a long-term plan about how we're going to do things, or very hard to do the complicated things that are going to have to be thought out. And so we take all our energy doing the simple knee-jerk things that we feel we can manage, which don't really reduce the stress. And so this is a kind of spiral. Stress people work harder and harder, are less and less productive, less and less feeling as though they're getting on, and then they get more stressed, and round it goes. So I think this is a point to actually become self-aware and say, right a second, I've got to take stock. And that's where I think we know now that the stress chemicals in your brain put you into, what people call bushfire brain. It shows up first and your memory doesn't work right in all sorts of different ways. And it's not because you're getting dementia or Alzheimer's or anything like that. It's because you've got too much stress chemicals in your brain. And don't worry, you'll come out of it. But you've got to get out of the stress. The second way is I feel disorganised and unproductive and I can't get stuff done. The third one is I'm incredibly inefficient. I remember a farmer talking about how he'd try to set his tractor up and then he would realise he needed a spanner and he'd go to his shed and he'd see a half repaired pump on the bench and he'd think, oh yeah, I was doing that, and he'd start doing that, and then he'd realise he needed something else and he'd go to the next shed and he'd do that, he said, all day, and he'd end up at the end of the day and he'd remember the tractor still sitting in the shed and he hadn't achieved anything, he never finished anything. This is the sort of unproductive thing. I do it on my desk when I get very stressed instead of writing reports. And so that's the thing to recognise, the bushfire brain. And there's a recipe of getting out of that and getting out of the stress mode, and that is to replenish your energy. First of all, physical energy. The most important thing is sleep. Really make sure you prioritise your sleep. We often don't want to. We stay up late watching television or doing something. And so watch the sleep. That is the best energising source. Watch your diet. Watch your exercise patterns. And all those simple, there's lots of information about managing stress. But I want to just emphasise what I think is most important about the emotional side, and that is two things, pleasure and leisure. Pleasure or enjoyment is enjoyable because I'm really meeting my needs, I'm expressing myself, I'm doing something that gives me a real sense of satisfaction, whether it be, I don't know, knitting or carving something or doing something around the house or whatever, gardening, whatever gives you your fix. Walking in the forest, I was going to say, but that wouldn't be very stressful, would it? But whatever you enjoy, go for that enjoyment and really carve out regular moments during the day where you just do something that you enjoy. And with your family, just spend time hanging out, enjoying, having fun, a bit of laughter, whatever. Invest time, energy and money into enjoyment. It will pay you back tenfold. The second thing is leisure. Leisure, by definition, it's time when I don't have to do anything. I think it's very important to carve out whatever time you think you can. If it's only Sunday afternoon, then Sunday afternoon. From 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock, no work. And so then you can say, well, what do I want to do? And then you start to actually connect with yourself in a way that the stress response has completely overridden. You connect with your whole self and take time. And that's when people will find that after they've had a period of leisure, they actually see things a bit clearer. They get them in perspective. They can start to make plans. Maybe even better than once a week, do it twice a week, or maybe take a bit of leisure every evening. Really make sure. Maybe take a little bit of leisure at lunchtime if you can. Break it up so that, and if possible, try to plan to, I don't know, get away from the area every now and again. So many people have told me how good it was to just get away for a weekend or a day or something and just not think about fires and that sort of stuff. Leisure, just having leisure and enjoyment. And I think to really see these are absolutely vital resources for your recovery, because they were going to feed the energy into a place where you can't just get it by sleeping and so on. And the other thing I think that is really important is the right sort of social relationships, being understood, being able to have free conversations, even if they're online, and exchanges with people, a bit of humour, a few jokes, and to looking forward over the next, we don't know what's really ahead of us in terms of COVID and so on, but we do know what's ahead with bushfire recovery, and that's a long, hard slog. We've got lots of support around. Maybe it's still quite a bit of work to get everything to connect up right. And so I think to be thinking about, we know our community best, let's get together and let BRV and Shire and everyone else know what do we think will help, and then start that dialogue about how that can be matched up with the services. Because this is basically the philosophy. Recovery, the jargon, recovery should be community-led. So that means you give us the ideas about how we can help. And I think we can certainly talk again, and if anyone's got any thoughts about particular problems or issues that you'd like to get information on, further information about trauma or whatever, we can certainly make more of these interviews. And what I really hope is that before too long I can come down there, and I'd love to drive up that road and have a look at your very interesting little community there, and get a sense of what that beautiful part of East Gippsland is like. So I hope that can happen before too long. So thank you very much for your time.